Welcome back to the 0 to KSM challenge for Dragonflight Season 2. And oh my, I think Dilly's starting to finally know what it feels like to be a healer. Because this week was absolute hell. And as you've probably guessed from today's thumbnail, this one was eventful. And I'm going to be completely honest with you from the get-go. There were things that happened this week that made me feel like, yeah, maybe I'll just take this week off. However, going into this week, I really wanted to fill the vault. That meant I had to power through and finish 8 Mythic Plus dungeons. But before we go any further, if you would like to watch me live or perhaps join me for some Keystones, you can catch me live over on Twitch a few days a week. A link to that and all of my other socials can be found below. So, we begin this week with an item level of 405 and a Mythic Plus rating of 815. And we start the week off by doing the 5 Dragonflight Heroic Dungeons weekly. And going into these dungeons, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. Now, the first 2 episodes were actually recorded before I got any feedback from you guys. So hopefully this week, you can expect to see some improvement. Because you guys have been incredibly supportive, you've been sharing some tips, you've been telling me what I've been doing wrong, which is really, really good because, well, I need to improve. And if my mistakes aren't pointed out and I don't fix them, well then I'm going to go nowhere. So I've taken all of the advice and tips on board. I also did some reading from Wowhead, and I watched a couple of videos online that went over some of the basics because I clearly need it, right? Oh, and by the way, a massive shout out to Meg. Her videos have been incredibly helpful. Now, I struggled to retain certain things, so I had to go over her basic Mistweaver guide a few times, so she got quite a bit of watch time out of me. I then went over her advanced guide. I had to watch her guide about Chi. Yeah, there's more to that than I thought. Holy moly. And then I tried watching some of her high key videos where she times like plus 20s and 21s and 22s. Yeah, I couldn't really follow along. Although she has an add-on which displays what spells she's pressing, it was really hard for me to keep up with it. It was just too fast paced for me. And of course I could have set the speed to something like 50% so I could slow it down and actually take in what happened, but it just wasn't enjoyable. So yeah, if you're interested in learning Mistweaver, I highly recommend you check Meg's videos out. So the heroic dungeons go absolutely fine as expected. I don't really feel like much has changed. Though I did struggle with a few things because as mentioned, I've started changing little bits and pieces around. I swapped some of my keybinds over. I had to move my party frames in more because I felt like it was just too far away. And I also tried to simplify my weak auras because I feel like maybe I'm tracking a bit too much. But then as I started deleting some and taking some away, I realized that I actually look at the majority. Like, not all the time, but there are times where I do look to them. And although it still feels kind of bloated and there's still things I can take away, for the most part, I think I'm just going to leave it and try and get used to the way things are now. I don't know, maybe in the future I slim it down, or at least try, but for now, I'm just going to leave it like this. Now, by moving my party frames, I did introduce a little bit of overlap with some of the weak auras, which I thought I changed and moved them across, though apparently I missed a few, so you might see some overlap during today's video. But don't worry, at the end I fixed it, so it's all good now. Apart from that, this week was a bit of a struggle to those that use ElvUI. And I bet now that I've mentioned this, a bunch of you probably understand and already know what I struggled with this week, because you probably struggled with it too. But before we jump into any of that, we're going to open our weekly heroic cache and we're going to open the vault. So we did in fact start at 405 item level, but as you can see, we are now 404. And that's purely because we actually looted the spoils of Nelfaris from, well, Nelfaris. Now, this trinket is seen as one of our best trinkets, so I'm quite happy about that because my current trinkets are actually really bad. This is what's letting me down the most, I think. Not amazing because obviously we got it at a heroic dungeon level, but we're going to sink loads of flight stones into that and get it fully upgraded. Because honestly, I don't think we're going to replace it anytime soon. But now is time to open the weekly heroic cache, and from this we loot a 415 helm, unfortunately without haste, but it's quite a big upgrade in terms of item level. And then we move on to the vault. Unfortunately we only have 2 slots this week, so I'm kinda hopeful that at least one of them is half decent. Though sadly this isn't the case. We are presented with a 242 back piece, again without haste, but it's a pretty big upgrade, and then a 428 ring. Now, in terms of which item I chose, I kind of had the thought of, in terms of upgrading my gear, when it comes to rings, you need both of them. And then once I get my BIS, I can sink loads of flight stones into, like, you know, as a catch-up mechanic, I can get it up to the same item level. So there was that. The back piece, however, although it was a big item level upgrade, it meant dropping a lot of haste, which I didn't really have a lot to begin with. Though, to be fair, I think gems was probably a good shout as well, because these items were pretty terrible for me. Looking at it now, I probably should have gone for the back piece because it's, as I mentioned, a pretty big upgrade in terms of item level. But my theory about the rings and being able to upgrade a future BIS ring, for example, or something with like a lot of haste, I felt like that was the better choice in the long run. So I may have made a big mistake, but I felt like it was the right thing to do. It made sense in my head anyway. Of course, if you disagree and feel I should have gone for the back piece because it was a big upgrade, let me know in the comments below. With the new helm equipped, it takes our item level back to 405. Now, before we jump into some Mythic Plus, I did want to upgrade a couple of pieces, and I also wanted to enchant some gear too, because, yeah, I've been pretty lazy in that department. I haven't actually enchanted anything yet, so we're going to fix that. And we did just that. So I had enough to upgrade my weapon. I chose to upgrade the trinket because, let's face it, we're not going to replace that anytime soon. And then I upgraded the wrists because they had a lot of haste. That brought all of those items up to 411 and our total item level up to 409. Along with this, I enchanted all of my gear and it was finally time to jump in to some Mythic Plus. And that brings me on to this week's affixes. It is, of course, a fortified week, and we have the introductory of the brand new affix for Dragonflight Season 2, Afflicted. We also have Raging at plus 14, but come on. You really think we're reaching that level? Yeah, sorry to disappoint, but it's not happening this week. So the key that I am presented with this week is an Alderman plus 8. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to join someone else's key. We'll start with a 6. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes really well, perhaps we'll consider doing the 8. So that's what we did. And we jumped into a Halls of Infusion plus 6. Thankfully, this dungeon actually goes really well. There was really only one thing that I wanted to get out of this, or I guess avoid, and that was to fall off the bridge, because, man, you guys would never let that down. We do indeed end up 2 chests in this run, and it takes our total mythic rating up to 847. We do pick up some boots with some yummy haste, but sadly, I'm already wearing them. Now, from here, because I'm filled with confidence, I decide to run my own key, which is of course an Alderman plus 8. And that means we have the introductory of Afflicted. But this is where everything starts going wrong. Alright, so I put together the group. This includes both myself and a shaman, which can deal with the Afflicted. And then we have a prot warrior, a warlock, and a hunter. Yeah, I can't seem to escape the hunters. They're everywhere. So, we start the run, and I guess is now a good time to tell you that I've never seen Afflicted before. I've not watched a guide, and I have no idea what to expect. I have simply read the tooltip and just assumed I know how to deal with them. And to be fair, I wasn't wrong, though they were a massive issue to begin with. And can you notice why? Alright, before I get into it, let's talk about Afflicted. Taken from the tooltip, while in combat, Afflicted souls periodically appear and seek the aid of players. This basically means every 30 seconds up to 2 Afflicted souls will spawn, and they start casting an uninterruptible spell, which reduces the haste by 100% to all party members for 10 seconds. Yeah, this one's pretty huge. There are 2 ways to deal with this, and to be honest, it's pretty simple. Sometimes. So the easiest way to deal with this is to simply dispel them. Who can do this, you may ask? Well, we have priests, paladins, druids, shamans, monks, evokers, and mages. Apparently, anyway. The second way to deal with these is to heal them up to full HP. So whose job is it to actually deal with Afflicted? Now, you guys can troll on healers all you want and say this is a healer affix, but honestly, if you actually go into these dungeons with that mindset, I'd be very surprised if you made it very far. Because although it is very possible for myself to dispel one and then heal the second one, is it really that hard for another party member to dispel the second one? It's super efficient and you take that extra stress off of the healer. Now, when it comes to stuff like explosives and interrupts, as a DPS player, I'm actually really competitive with those sort of things. And at the end of the day, I'm a massive team player. I always put other players' needs before my own. Alright, so you can see I'm struggling to heal the tank. And when Afflicted occurs, I manage to dispel one, but because I'm not used to healing and I'm using click, I have to do things in a way that I'm just not used to. So in order for me to heal the second one, I have to manually click on them, and then I have to mouse over the target frame and heal from there, which I don't actually realize at the time. Because in the heat of the moment, when everyone else is taking damage, I get really flustered. And that's one of the main issues I encounter today. But we'll talk more about that very soon. So we're off to a rocky start and we get to the first boss. And because I mentioned how flustered I get at times, I think I'll let this one play out and you can see exactly what goes wrong. Yeah, so the hunter dies and leaves the party. I then try and take a bit of cover where I'm not taking damage, and I try Hearthstoning out of there. It doesn't quite go well. So now I would like to take a minute just looking back at the footage and explain what I thought went wrong. Throughout this entire fight, I struggle to stand in my Feline Stomp. Even with the resets, I just couldn't find a good place to stand. I mean, there is a lot going on in this fight. It is very difficult for positioning, so I'm going to give myself a bit of a break on that one. I can see here that I am not using all of my Renewing Mists, which is very, very bad. I forget to use my Vivify procs. And then there is Enveloping Mists that I've been using incorrectly, and I'll get to that later on in the video. Along with this, I'm not making the most of Zen Pulse, and I've also not been making the most of Thunder Focus Tea. Though on top of this massive list of things that I think I'm getting wrong, one thing that I have struggled with from the very beginning, and that's basically AoE healing. And when everyone's taking damage, I don't know if I should rely on my healing abilities or my offensive abilities. For the most part, when I panic, I start casting Soothing Mists and then spamming Vivify, purely because I'm not confident that my offensive abilities like Rise and Sunkick will actually get the job done. So yeah, those are the struggles that I'm currently dealing with. There are a couple of other things that I'm getting wrong or not doing, but I'll talk more about that later on in the video. So Alderman +8 was a complete disaster, and I thought, you know what, let's give it another crack at a +7, but this time I will invite a couple more classes that can help with the dispels. So I do just that, and I pick up a Priest, a Paladin, and an Evoker. On top of that, I bring a Demon Hunter, but I mean, they can't really help, right? Stupid Demon Hunters. Who would play one of those? So this one goes a little better. Alright, I lied. This is so much better than the previous run, but there are still some massive issues that we will get to in just a second. Now, I'm still struggling with the healing side of things, and of course, Afflicted isn't helping either. When it comes to Afflicted, I've kind of got the mindset that I will try my best to dispel the first one, and then try and heal the second one, but as mentioned, I have to click on the Afflicted mob. I then have to highlight over my target frame and heal from there, which to me is super alien and weird, and I'm not used to it, and it just doesn't work. Plus, I feel like the monk is just a bit too slow. But that is probably just a me problem. Like, I've spoken to some Resto Shamans. They basically use a couple of healing surges and then one Riptide, and the second one's done. For me, of course, I have to start channeling Soothing Mists, and it just takes forever. But on top of that, and you've probably already noticed, but we haven't even addressed the elephant in the room. So for me, when Afflicted spawn, I don't actually see their bar. This means I also don't see their cast bar. Now, this issue seems to be a Plater thing, and to everyone using ElvUI, I believe Plater's also embedded in that pack. If you're running the default UI, then it will work for you, and there are some fixes, there are some settings that you can enable by default. Yeah, I tried those, and none of them seem to work for me. So this is what I had to deal with this reset. Now, after recording all of this, I did actually find a fix through one of Quasi's videos, but hopefully by the time you're watching this, it's fixed anyway. Plus, I mean, by the time you're watching this, Afflicted was so last week, right? Wow, did I really just say that? I'm so old. Alright, we get to the end of the dungeon, we end up free chesting the run, and it takes our total rating up to 880. This was a very tough encounter, and thankfully I had a prop paladin to help with the off healing, because man, I needed it. But one thing I wanted the paladin and the rest of the group to help with were the dispels. And although the priest helped out with a few mass dispels, which by the way I'm pretty sure don't actually dispel the mobs, the paladin and evoker were nowhere to be seen. Now, this was incredibly hard, and if the rest of the group aren't going to help out with the dispels, I think +7s and upwards, yeah, I'm done for the week. Maybe we just go back to 6s. And that is exactly what we did, because clearly I wasn't ready for Afflicted, and nor was anyone else. That's not to mention that all of my recordings are done on a Wednesday, so it's the first day, the first time, pretty much the entire player base is dealing with Afflicted for the very first time, because the majority of the player base don't bother with the PTR, so they've never seen this before. And I definitely fell into that category because I had no idea what to expect. But I honestly don't think I was handling it that badly. I mean, obviously it could have gone better, I could have healed the other one, but in the heat of the moment and everything else going on and so much damage, I get so flustered, I couldn't deal with both. There were even times where you could clearly see one of them on my screen and I just focused so much, and because I don't see their bar, it just kind of blends into the background and I just let it go off. So sadly, I'm at an all-time low. I don't feel like I can comfortably heal +7s with the Afflicted affix, and I decide to jump into an underrot +6. There's nothing really to report on this one. We end up free chesting the run. It takes our total score up to 937. And sadly, just like the Alderman run, we get no loot. From here, I decide to end the night by doing a Nelfaris +6. Once again, this key goes incredibly smooth. We end up free chesting the run, and it takes our total rating up to 946. Now, sadly at this point, usually on a Wednesday, this is where we stop recording and we're pretty much done for the reset in terms of episodes. This week, I really wanted to fill the vault and get 8 dungeons done. However, because of all the events, we've only managed 4, which is half. I know, I'm so good at math. If I was to carry on recording the next day, it would massively push the content back, and I would honestly struggle to find the time on top of everything else that's going on. But the 4 dungeons, and the dungeons I did, it just wasn't good enough, man. It wasn't acceptable, and I feel like you guys deserve a lot better. So it was decided I would go to bed and I would research the Mistweaver Monk. I would pinpoint everything that I was doing wrong, and hopefully I would see some improvements. Because from today's experience, I felt really down about myself and I wanted to give up. But that is not the Dilly way. Yo, you. Yeah, you. Did you know that leaving a like on this video increases your chances of getting the best loot from your weekly vault? Alright, so maybe it doesn't. Fine, I get it. I know when I'm not wanted. Back to the video. So, we woke the next day. I was fueled by coffee and pancakes, and I was ready to take on the world of Warcraft. I was honestly struggling to find groups that needed a healer. It was about 9:30 in the morning, and it was a Thursday, so, you know, I guess everyone's working. So, from the Alderman +7 that we 3-chested, that gave me an Underrot +10. The group I put together, I wanted to be a little picky with it. I wanted at least 2 other people that could potentially dispel. But thankfully, the group I do end up putting together, all 5 players can dispel. I was also vocal at the beginning, and I asked very politely if everyone else could pitch in, because it would make my life a lot easier and it would make the entire run go a hell of a lot smoother. Not to mention that this was a +10, the highest I've ever gone so far. Oh, and if you haven't noticed already, we have a Guardian Druid. I don't do so well with those. I wonder how this run's gonna go. So, we begin the run and I am incredibly nervous because, as mentioned, a +10 is the highest I've gone so far. It doesn't start so well. I don't notice that I have the bleed on me. I stand in another one of the abilities and I end up dying. I run back and I'm still incredibly flustered with the entire situation. Looking back on it, I can see I'm still misplaying, but all the research that I did last night, I noticed a few things. So I'm not going to go through absolutely everything, but Renewing mists is something I massively improved on for this run, because ideally I should keep both of my charges on cooldown. They should always be out. I think for the most part, like going into new packs, I've been throwing them on both myself and the tank, because they're arguably like the most important two out of the group, right? We move on to the trash pack just before the first boss, and I can see that the Guardian Druid is not actually taking that much damage, and the damage they are taking, well, they're doing a butt ton of healing, so it kind of fills me with confidence, and maybe I was wrong about Guardian Druids. Too soon to tell, but we do move on to the first boss, and to my surprise, it goes extremely well. There isn't too much here for me to worry about, no one standing in anything they shouldn't be, and in terms of rotation, looking back at the footage now, it's like a light bulb went off because everything just started to click. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, it's still early. In terms of Afflicted, it actually started really well. When there was only one, it was like a struggle for me to dispel it. Like someone was always beating me to it. So I was very happy about that. Although when there were two that spawned, I was always one that got the other. By the time we got to the second boss, we did have a couple of deaths due to players standing in the frontal ability from the maggots. Yeah, nothing I can really do about that. Though the second boss does actually go really well. Everyone's stacking correctly, the ticks are being dealt with, and the tank deals with it nicely too. Sadly, leading up to the third boss, there's a cast that one of the mobs does called Withering Curse. Yeah, this really needs to be interrupted, and sadly on our case, a few of us actually die. I should do a lot better personally with the interrupts. I've been lacking on a few of them, but there's been so much going on. I'll do better next time, I swear. And then we get to the mushroom boss, and man, I was scared of this one because of how poorly it went last time. And well, I get a little flustered with this one too. I end up standing in too many of the orbs, and sadly I die. Yeah, maybe one day I'll do this boss without dying. Though I get picked back up, no one else dies, and we end up finishing the boss. Is this too good to be true? Am I finally making progress? Is this the turning point? We make it to the final boss with quite a lot of time left, and a couple of extra deaths. One of them might have been me. And although at times I got a little flustered, there was a lot of AoE damage, and I struggled with the Afflicted, purely because I was tunneling and I just didn't know they were there. We end up finishing the fight with no further deaths. On top of that, we +2'd the key. And would you look at that, the Guardian Druid was helping with all of the dispels. What a champ. From the chest, we sadly picked up another chest piece, which we won't be using because we've already got Tear in that slot. But the Druid's actually nice enough to give me a weapon for off-spec. Of course, we won't be using it just yet, but once this challenge is over, perhaps we try Windwalker or Brewmaster? Yeah, this Guardian Druid was actually super polite throughout the entire dungeon as well. Really weird. Guys, there's nice people in this game. So by 2 chests in this run, it took our total rating up to 990. And oh my god, we just timed a +10. Now at this point, I didn't know if it was pure luck, being carried by other players, or like mentioned previously, something just felt like it clicked. You know, you get those feelings and everything just starts working and falling into place. That's what it felt like. However, I am struggling very much with identifying those situations where I need to trust my offensive abilities to heal the group. There are still times where I get flustered, I panic, and I start casting Soothing Mists into Enveloping Mists and then all the Vivifies. I should really only be doing that sort of thing for like tank busters when a certain target is taking a lot of damage. Let's say the first boss in Brackenhide, for example, with the bleed. Yeah, it finally feels like everything is coming together. But we're not done yet, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, so the key I do get from that run is a Neltharian's Lair +12, which I downed to a 10. I don't want to get too cocky. If I can do 110, I want to know if I can do other 10s, which pushes us into a whole new bracket, by the way, in terms of the gear that we get from these runs. And then with a bit more gear and practice, we can start pushing a bit higher. So I put together a fairly decent group in terms of dispels, item level, and previous Neltharian's Lair experience. Though the only player in the group that's actually done a key at this level for Neltharian's Lair was the priest. Everyone had done a Neltharian's Lair, but slightly lower. Oh, would you look at that? Not only do we have another hunter, but we've got another Guardian Druid. So we start this run and we take down the first boss. We then take down the second boss. We take down the third boss, and as we begin the last boss, I suddenly realized, wait, no one's died yet? Dude, this is too good to be true. But don't worry, you can always rely on a hunter to ruin it for everyone else. Oh, and all of my hunter jokes, by the way, to anyone that plays a hunter, it's more of like an inside joke that we have with the streaming community. I have nothing against them at all. I just like making fun of them. And in fact, in this case, looking back at the footage, it looks like they got hit by the frontal, but they were also AFK for a little bit of that fight. I'm not sure why. But yeah, sadly, we end up free chesting the run, and that was the only death. No flawless run today. This takes our total rating up to 1068. Damn it, just 1 point away. And the key we get from this one is a freehold plus 13. Now, this was a big step up from the 10 I had been previously doing. And 10 was already a massive step up from what I was doing before that. I put together what I thought was a pretty decent comp. The item levels were a bit higher than usual, though I think this is pretty common for a freehold because it is very popular, at least at this key level. There are quite a few very geared players farming this place. Presume it's mostly for crests, but it could also be like the trinket, the dice trinket, for example, that I want on my demon hunter that everyone seems to be getting in front of me. Yeah, I still don't have that. So this one doesn't start too badly, though we got to the first boss, and this is where I start noticing that once again, I might be the only player dealing with Afflicted. So just before we start the first boss, I try and drink because I'm only at like 20% mana. And I don't realize at the time, but we actually have an Afflicted to dispel as well. So the tank decides to start the encounter. I have very little mana. And I also have 100% reduced haste for another 5 seconds. I have a bad feeling about this one. Though, thankfully, the first boss goes down completely fine, a few mistakes on my part, but no one dies. However, this is where things started to go very, very wrong. After the first boss, we cross the bridge and we start trying to take down the ad packs on the other side. Unfortunately, here is where the tank goes down. I end up dying once. I run back, we're fighting on the bridge and I die again. And just as I feel like we're making progress and getting to the second boss, I die a third time. And if you wondered why some of these classes didn't help out with dispels, well, as it turns out, they didn't know they could help, even though they're spec'd into it. But there's really no reason to be rude about it. Don't be that guy. Now, as I died a third time, I was running back. I was halfway across the bridge and they started the boss without me. Honestly, I wasn't there. I don't know if it was a mistake, but I got pretty salty about this one. I got back to the boss, I jumped down, and as I jumped down, I got hit by the grape shot. You guys have been hit by grape shot, right? It hurts. Now, I did end up getting CR'd. We continued the fight. However, there is a trash pack that I do like to take before we start this boss because this happens. And in pugs, it happens a lot. Alright, so we wipe again, we get back to the boss, and thankfully, this time, we managed to take them down. And after the boss, well, you remember the ads that I always like to take before the second boss? Yeah, well, I have to throw down Ring of Peace to block them because the tank really doesn't want to pick them up, even though we are very likely going to pull them at some point. I'm so glad I have this ability. You want to know why? Because they come back a second time and I have to do it again. Yeah, when I'm tanking, I always kill this pack. God, it just makes me want to tank again. Woosah. Woosah, Dilly. Now, from here, we continue to pull ads leading up to the third boss. We gain a few additional deaths. We're not doing too bad for time, to be fair. Although, sadly, I think the druids had enough and they end up leaving the group. Now, is it just me, or does Season 2 dungeons feel very forgiving in terms of time? I feel like even with the 17 deaths that we have now, we've still got plenty of time. I honestly felt like we could still time this run, even with the lack of dispels. But unfortunately, I guess it wasn't to be. So that knocked our key down to a plus 12. I formed a new group and we started again. Now, the first boss went really well, the second boss went really well, and to be honest, the first death came to a trash pack where I wasn't even there. So it's safe to say that this run was going a lot better. And although it was a little messy with positioning on the last boss, we end up free chesting this key. It takes our total rating up to 1108, and I get some legs from the chest. Exactly the same legs as I was wearing, just one level higher. Yeah, I basically just upgraded my current ones with flight stones so I could keep my enchant. I didn't want to waste gold. Oh, dispels were really good for this one as well. The paladin absolutely smashed it. With 7 dungeons down, I had 1 left to go. The key I got from that run was a Neltharian's Lair plus 15, and I wasn't quite feeling that one. Plus, we'd already been there this week, so I decided to look for a Brackenhide Hollow 13. 13 purely because it's the highest I could go without adding an additional affix. I'd already pushed so far this week, I didn't want to push my luck. Now, here is where I would love to sit here and tell you that we finished this week on a high. But unfortunately, that just wasn't to be, because this was one of those runs where it felt like the rest of the group perhaps didn't know all of the tactics. The prop paladin went through the entire dungeon without dispelling any of the afflicted mobs, though the shaman was helping out, but it wasn't great overall because quite a few actually went off. That's not to say it's their fault, because it's a team effort. I let them go off too. Now, because of the previous runs, I felt really good about myself and I was in a good mood. I mean, considering what I went through the day before, man, I've come so far in such little time. I went through the entire run being very vocal in party chat, because it was very clear at times that they didn't know the mechanics. So I took this opportunity to try and teach them so they could go into the next dungeon and hopefully perform a lot better. That said, I had to bite my tongue at the last boss, and that's the only thing I'm going to show you. Now, this boss took like 4 attempts. I kept stressing to the tank. When the green circle spawns, please don't run through it. Just kite the boss around the room. The DPS will kill the totem. Rinse and repeat. But every time it spawned, the tank just kept running through it. Oh my god, it was a nightmare. They wasn't the only one. The rest of the players were like dipping in and out of it as well. And it was just awful. But eventually, 49 deaths later, it took 57 minutes to finish this run. Holy moly. Of course, that means we receive no rating from this run, and sadly, I get no loot. Though I kind of feel like I deserve something from that run. And that is where we end this reset. A total item level of 409 and our mythic rating up to 1108. And it finally feels like I'm making progress. Maybe I can do this after all. Our goal for this reset was to fill the vault, and fill the vault I did. Though if it gives me multiple tier slots, I think I'm gonna cry. So in one reset where I started off and I felt absolutely horrible about healing and had the worst time playing World of Warcraft, to having that light bulb moment where suddenly everything just makes sense. And I managed to push as high as a 13. Dude, I am so happy with my progress. So happy. I'm still lacking a lot of gear, but damn, it feels good and so rewarding once you start actually doing things properly. Now, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. I'm still new to the role. I'm still new to the spec. I'm still making a lot of mistakes and I'm still learning. But do you know what? I'm proud of how far I've come. And I honestly can't wait for this challenge to be over so I can heal in a pre-made group with you guys. Big shout out to all of the helpful tips that you guys have been coming up with in the comments. Massively appreciate that. Thank you so much. I very much appreciate all the love and support on this series. And if you enjoyed the video, a like would be much appreciated. But that's me done. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.